Well, yeah, Dad kept multiple journals. Unfortunately, they were fragmented. He'd start writing about one policy or one issue he was working on, and then he'd go to another. So there were multiple writings about A&M. A lot of it was writings about some of the resistance that he faced and some of the obstacles he had to overcome to bring A&M to San Antonio. Um, as 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 he realized that he was going to be successful at bringing it, he spent more time sort of tracking some of the legislation that, especially the first $40 million that he received for the first building. He would write day by day kind of how the legislation was doing it. A lot of it's dry and not very exciting. One of the journal writings that is interesting to read is because there was resistance from some in the community to bring a university to the South Side, he made it a point after leaving office, just days after leaving office, after a 33-year career, he wrote some passages about the people that he wanted to recognize and the people that helped him overcome many of the obstacles that he had to overcome in order to bring higher ed to the South Side. When he entered politics in the 1970s, the one public university and all the private universities were south of Interstate 90. So when he entered his teaching career in 1959 at Escobar, one of the poorest school districts in town, he was well aware that there was an inequity in the access to higher education for his students. When he entered politics, as I said, the one public university and every private university, once again, were located north of Interstate 90. And there were many other people fighting to address the inequities in higher ed. It wasn't his unique idea, but as he entered politics, as he continued in his teaching career, there were folks that were fighting to bring a college to the south side of San Antonio, what we now know as Palo Alto. You had community leaders, you had academic leaders, you had COPS organization, which is Communities Organized for Public, fighting to bring a university, and they were successful to finally to bring that university to us in 1985 at a temporary facility, just as A&M San Antonio started. Along the way, we had folks like MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Education Defense Fund, and LULAC, who sued the state of Texas in the late 1980s because of the inequities in access to higher education. And that all resulted in us being the city of San Antonio receiving millions and millions of dollars to expand higher ed. The UT Health Science Center was able to expand programs. UTSA was able to expand to a campus downtown. And so Dad was a part of some of these things along the way. So I think his piece of the puzzle of all of this work was to finally bring a four-year university to the south side of San Antonio. In 2005, as he was working for this first building, trying to obtain actually he initially asked for $80 million. He was given $40 million. But as he worked for those dollars to bring a university, the university, its first building, he knew in 2005 that we had over 80% of our populace in San Antonio without a college degree. And so he understood that if the city was to continue to prosper, to continue to grow, we had to have an educated populace. You know, there's an aphorism that I don't know he knew, but it's something that somebody much smarter than me shared with me once, and that's that if a community that's uneducated and unhealthy has no future, or at least is going to have a difficult future. And so while I never shared that with Dad, I don't know that he ever heard that aphorism before, I can tell you that of the over 1,400 bills that he passed and the 650 plus bills, actually of the 1,400 bills that he filed or co-authored or sponsored, and the 650 bills that eventually he passed, the vast majority of them had to do with healthcare and education. Even though he was an advocate for education, actually most of the bills he passed had to do with healthcare. So why did he bring it to the South Side? It's because he knew that's where the need was at. He had taught in that community for decades. He had represented that community for decades. He understood that there was a need there. And more importantly, he knew that there was a desire there. He knew that the people, if they had a university that was accessible, that was locally present and affordable, that people would come. And I think the future has proven him correct in that. Well, I think it's changed a little bit over time. As I said, my father, taught in a community that was traditionally underserved, that he found underserved when he started teaching there in the 1950s. A community that was underserved in many ways when he moved there in 1963 to raise his family. His vision initially, when it came to bringing a university to the south side of San Antonio, was to build on some of these successes that we spoke of earlier. COPS organization and leaders bringing Palo Alto to your college to the south side, the MALDEF and the LULAC suing the state of Texas, and then eventually millions of dollars coming to San Antonio by way of the South Texas Border Initiative and building a downtown campus at UT. Dad's vision was to build on those successes. And to provide folks in a traditionally underserved area, the community, another opportunity at having a better life by way of education. Some of the stories that stick out in my mind that we reflect on my father's vision are two. One story is of a young lady who sat at the table with me for lunch one time. The university had some sort of fundraising event, 10 people per table, sitting outside having lunch, and they would sit one or two students at the table in order for us to engage with students and to meet some of the people that were receiving some of the scholarship dollars that we were donating or raising. And there was one young lady who sat next to me and was telling me about how she'd given up hope on going to college. She had made some decisions early in life that she felt was going to be prohibitive. And she'd had two children at a very young age, single mother, living with her grandmother. And so she'd given up on college, trying to make a living to support her kids and contribute to the grandmother's household. And it just so happened that her grandmother's house was off of Gillette. And when A&M was in portables, they decided we didn't have enough room. We had to meet certain benchmarks in order to become a freestanding, standalone university. And one of those benchmarks is we had to have a certain number of full-time equivalent students. The problem that the school was running into is we had plenty of students and they kept coming, but we didn't have enough buildings for them, so it was restricted. So one of the things that Dr. Ferrier did was we went and leased a building for $1 a year off of Gillette. It was a elementary school. Well, it just so happens this young lady's grandmother's house was across the street, and so when they put the sign up, Texas A&M San Antonio Kingsville System Center, every day she saw that sign through her window, and her grandmother saw the sign. So the grandmother offered to babysit the children if she was willing to walk across the street and attend college, and she did. So by the time she sat with me at the table, she was already in her junior year, senior year maybe, of working on her bachelor's in education. I ran into her a few years later, and she was applying for the master's program in education. So that's the first story that I think reflects on Dad's vision. The second story is a couple, we'll call them Mr. V, Mr. and Mrs. V as in Victory. First generation graduates. They decided they were born and raised on the south side. When A&M came, they saw that as their opportunity to attend college, and they did. They also received a bachelor's in education. They continued on in the master's program. In the meantime, their daughter also applied to A&M San Antonio and was accepted and started her bachelor's degree in education. And ironically, when they finished their master's degree, their daughter finished her bachelor's. And so the father, the mother, and the daughter were able to walk the stage at the same time. I've been able to stay in touch with this couple. I participate in something called tailgating at every college A&M football game. And they're now in College Station, just having completed their PhD work in education. So that, more than anything, I think reflects on why Dad worked so hard to bring A&M to San Antonio, because of people like these folks, because of stories like this. Now the vision has changed somewhat, and I think Dad would agree that in order for the school to continue to prosper and thrive and grow, that we're going to have possibly less of these first generation graduates. We're going to become more of a destination school. We're going to have PhD programs, and we're going to be drawing more and more people beyond the boundaries of Dad's original intent, which was the neighborhoods that he represented for so long. And in time, we're going to have people coming probably from beyond the United States. I know we've had some international students visit and do some internships with the university. So I look forward to seeing even that roll out. I think the core, the nucleus of Dad's vision will always be there. The school is located in the neighborhoods that he represented. It's accessible, it's a public school, and it's for the most part affordable for these families. And so we'll continue to draw students from these areas that he represented for over 3 decades. He saw that there was a need in the community, and there was a desire from many of his students to continue on in education, but we're faced with a number of obstacles. Just as an example, I grew up next door to a family of 7 children, and there were 9 people in that house if you include the parents. There was only 2 cars out front, and so typically the people who were able to use the car were those that had a job. Some of the arguments I heard growing up when these discussions came about bringing A&M to San Antonio was, well, people can utilize public transportation. You know, interesting enough, when Dad heard that, first thing he did was he went and rode the bus, or he started pulling the via. Let me share this with you. He started pulling some of the bus schedules, and this was one of the things that I found in his belongings. And so he would go down the list, and he would see if a child jumped on the bus at Palo Alto and Southwest Barrio, it would take 174 minutes to get to UTSA. If you lived on the east side, 184 minutes from Rigsby and W.W. Wright Road. And so what the folks south of I-90 were being told, if you wanted to go to college, you had to ride the bus 4 to 6 hours a day in order to attend college. And so obviously there was not just paying for college as a roadblock, but how are they going to get there? So when Dad saw this, I think it was a seed for him to start planting the seeds of higher education on the South Side. To address this issue of transportation, one of the things he did do was he filed legislation to form an advanced transportation district in the 1990s. And what that did was take a quarter-cent of the sales tax, gave it to VIA to expand services so that you didn't have a 6-hour ride to go to college. So this is one of the ways he addressed this. But ultimately his desire was to bring education to the neighborhood so that it had locality and accessibility and affordability and those sorts of things.